Hi there, and welcome to The Artist Craft. I'm your host, Stacey Cochran, and we have an outstanding guest with us in studio today. Juergen Goldhagen is the author and editor of a collected memoir titled Manila Memories. Every once in a while, a little self-published book comes along my way that really surprises me and catches my attention, and I get caught up in the story. And this is one of those books. So I want to welcome Juergen for joining us in studio today.
Well, thank you for having me, and a pleasure to be here.
Well, the book is Manila Memories. Tell us a little bit about what your goal was in setting out to edit this collection together.
Well, my feeling is that I haven't seen many books, if any at all, on what life was like in the outside of the Santa Tomas internment camp, where all the Allied nations, the British, the Americans, etc., were interned by the Japanese. And some of us were not interned, so we were essentially free to roam around, within certain restrictions, but we were not interned. And I just thought it would be very interesting to talk about life outside of the Santa Tomas internment camp. And that's how it came about.
Well, it's a great book. The title again is Manila Memories, and like Juergen's saying, it's really a reflection on your time growing up in Manila, specifically during World War II, preceding World War II, and then during the Japanese occupation,
right,
in what they called an open city, and what life was literally like living in that war zone.
And also a short period after the liberation. In other words, what was it like when the American GIs came back in, and how did our experiences differ slightly?
And that's a good segue into thinking about one of the things that's really interesting about this book is that you've collected memories and this timeline of memories from 3 different authors, as well as your own reflection on it as well. So it's really a collected memoir. You have 4 people's memories of living in Manila during that time.
Right. Shortly before the war, of course we were younger then, teenagers during the war, and including right after the war. But the book primarily is about the occupation, World War II occupation by the Japanese of Manila. Right.
Now, how did you select your 3 co-authors for this book?
Well, at high school, we have the American high school. While it is in Manila itself, the reunions here in the States are within the United States. And I kept thinking, who had lived through the occupation like I myself had? And while we were in high school, nobody really talked about it. We were too busy growing up. But at the reunions, I thought of it, and then I thought, hey, in talking with the various alumni, the other 3 co-authors or whatever in here just hit me as, hey, they're very similar to what I went through, and we've become, friendlier than we were in high school. So I asked each of them if they wouldn't mind, and they said, yeah, it'd be very nice to do it.
What surprised you the most about their descriptions of this time? Now, these are 3 friends that you knew at that time in varying degrees of closeness, but what kind of surprised you the most in seeing their perspectives on living in the same place and time?
Well, what really surprised me, of course, was that Roderick Hall his parents were killed by the Japanese about 2 weeks before the liberation. And that was a big surprise. And then Hans Walzer, his experiences. The other three guys lived in the city itself. So they went through the experiences of the fighting in Manila. Myself, we were living outside in the suburbs, so it was peaceful. But as I said also, that Hans Höflein, the experiences he had, Waltzers, were really eye-opening. I mean, I'd always heard about the Battle for Manila, and I remember right after we were liberated, I could see fires, not the flames, but just the red glow on the horizon. And one of my friends, an adult, said, "Look at that, Juergen. You're not going to ever see that again in your lifetime." And I counted 7 of these glows, but I was not aware of what was really going on in the fighting, because we were out in the suburbs and it was peaceful for us.
It sounds like, you know, one of the things that a book like this can really do is kind of help you to reflect on it and process it. And like you've said twice now that when you were living in it, you didn't know anything different. It was just what you were living in at that time. But then with the reflection, you know, you kind of have a different sense of it or a different grasp of it.
Yeah, and of course, there's also the remembrance of, not that it's in the book, but how did our parents get us through this? You know, at the time, as a teenager, not interned, life was pretty normal. But for our folks, it must have just been terrible. I mean, the decision, how do you stay alive? Very, very difficult for them.
One of the things that struck me about the early part of the book was just almost the calm before the storm of living in Germany, the early years before the trip to Manila in 1937. Can you talk a little bit about, now we want folks to go out and buy the book, Manila Memories, but can you talk a little bit about what it was like growing up in this intensifyingly Jewish society in the 30s? What was the experience like?
Well, my own experiences, of course, I was only there until I was practically 7 years old when we left. But I had a normal childhood for those early years in that, yeah, my dad had gone to the Philippines, but leaving Mom and me behind. And the extended family, I mean, I was with my cousins. Life was fine. I was not in school yet. And so, yeah, you know, there were soldiers around. And so, wow, a soldier, oh my gosh, look at that truck they're in, or look at this, look at that. And watching the parade go by and giving the Nazi salute. Didn't think anything of it until, as I wrote in the book, I came home one day and I asked my mother, "Do I have 2 names?" And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, all the kids in school are calling me Jude, meaning Jew." So Mom thought, hey, it's high time we got out of here. But you know, I didn't experience any anti-Semitism. So happy memories of Germany.
It's just fascinating to see, and yet you've got to know that had some lasting impression, influence on your identity and your sense of identity. And that's one of the things that I got as a reader from the book, is just the formation of identity, and how it made me wonder about, well, how does the society that you grow up in affect your identity? Because you know, in Germany, the larger part of the society in the 30s was anti-Semitic, like you were saying, And then when you moved to Manila, the first year you describe it as being a very lonely time.
It was for me, yes. Because when we first arrived in Manila, you know, the ship trip, the memory of Manila, I mean, it was all interesting, and the ship trip was interesting. But then when we hit Manila, and Filipinos all spoke English, I couldn't speak English, I couldn't understand English. And so I was terribly lonely. I wanted to go back to Germany right away. And my playmates, I mean, how could I relate to them? The one kid I knew, he spoke Spanish. He didn't know any English either, and I didn't speak Spanish nor English. And so it was very lonely, and till a year went by, and then I started to make friends.
Now, one of the things that you've mentioned is, you know, that the importance of having written Manila Memories with 3 co-authors. And so let's dig into that a little bit. You said that the idea had sprung up at a reunion.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that experience?
You mean the idea
of putting down these memories from this time?
Well, I had always wanted to write a book, and I could never figure out, you know, how to do it, what topic would I pick. And then one day I thought, hey, wait a minute, you know, my experiences during the Japanese occupation, I was constantly rethinking them periodically. And then I thought, in talking to these friends here, I thought, hey, they've also had similar experiences. They were there during that time. And it was a very dramatic time for all of us. I mean, so I just happened to pick them. We were also very similar in age, or are similar in age. Mm-hmm. And so it just took off from there.
Now, were they at the reunion? Did you have the opportunity to talk with them there, or did you have to correspond with them afterwards?
Well, I not completely clear on whether I spoke to them about it at the reunion, but I remember, I mean, I emailed them, mm-hmm. Thanks to email, and also phoning. We were able to communicate continuously, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And so when I said, well, you know, how would you like to be in this? Rather than discussing it with them at the reunion, it was after the reunion when I thought more and more about it, and I thought, hey, wait a minute, let me see how they feel about it. And yeah, they were also very enthusiastic.
And you said that you had done some research, you'd visited bookstores, and there just wasn't this specific story, this story of living in the Philippines, or growing up specifically, you know, just sort of the normal life of being a kid in the Philippines,
right,
during the middle of the war.
Well, those were, of course, bookstores here in the States. Now, I don't know what bookstores in Manila may have. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm sure many people have written about them, but more from the Filipino point of view, whereas these were fellow, no, let's just say, okay, the books in Manila are from Filipinos' viewpoints. Mm-hmm. These were Caucasians that were not interned in Santo Tomas. Now, Filipinos were not, but we were unusual in the sense that we were not Filipinos, and yet we were not interned by the Japanese. So, in that sense, we had a lot. We four have had similar experiences.
What do you think? You know, I think, again, one of the things that's most fascinating to me is the development of identity. And, you know, I've been blessed growing up in the United States, and I had a fairly peaceful childhood, and it was a different window. It was a window on a different life to read this book. And it made me wonder how one's sense of identity is tied to their nationality. Do you consider yourself German? Do you consider yourself Filipino? Do you consider yourself Jewish? Or a little bit of all three, and American as well, I guess?
Yeah, I would say that in Manila, I didn't have a sense of being Germanic. My thoughts were the States. Now, I'd never been here, but Manila, before the war, Manila was an American territory, colony, and the movies were American. The language, of course, was English. The humor was American, movies, etc., etc. So I was oriented toward being an American. And after I came to the States, nowadays I'm still American in thought and also legitimately. So, yeah, it was not, well, when I first got to Manila, I certainly wished I was a Filipino. And as described in the book, at one point I wrapped a thread around my finger and it turned purplish, and I thought, oh boy, like a Filipino.
Sure, you can change your skin color.
Right, except I didn't wrap the rest of the thread around my body. I mean, I stopped right there.
It's a wonderful memory. And the book is filled with so many vivid memories. I guess a good question to ask, you know, a lot of our viewers and audience for these interviews are aspiring writers, and some of them have questions about how to develop a memoir and how to write a memoir. And here's a perfect example of a completed memoir, of course, written from 4 different folks' perspectives. How did you select the different memories? Now, you have this chronological order that is the central spine for the book.
Right.
But then beyond that, when you got into the individual sections, how did you say, well, this is the memory that I want to use? Was there some sort of cohesive thread that you were trying to draw from?
No, there really wasn't. The cohesive thread was really, what did you remember about Manila before the war as youngsters, of course, during the war, during the occupation, and right after the occupation. And that was the whole thread of the book. And the individual memories or experiences, and again, when you read the book, you will find that each person's writing is very different from the other person's. They're all 4 different writing styles.
Sure.
And giving you 4 different views of what things were like, again, to each one of these people.
Well, the book is Manila Memories. The author is Juergen Goldhagen. The book's available at online retailers everywhere and from a few local bookstores as well. And we've been talking about sort of the balance between life growing up in the Philippines during World War II, as well as some of the sort of editorial decisions that you had to make in actually constructing the book. And I suspect some of our viewers are fascinated by both. One thing that struck me was the sense of fear, that there was a sense of fear. You described seeing the air surveillance in Germany when you were 6 years old or so, with these balloons with swastikas, and then running inside.
Right.
And then moving to the Philippines, for a short while, there was maybe a sense of security, but then that didn't last very long either.
No. After Pearl Harbor was bombed, of course the Philippines was bombed as well. And being a teenager at that time and not having any idea of what war was like, I mean, when you looked up and saw a plane, you thought, if I can see them, they can see me. Boy, I better get under cover right away, even though in reality they were thousands of feet high. They couldn't see any object down below unless it was a large military type thing. But just a little kid there, hey, forget it. But it was a terrifying thing. And then, of course, there was always, even to this day, the fear, this very subtle fear, but a man with a gun, whoa, and the Japanese, of course, being soldiers, etc. Hey, it was fear, slight, but there.
It was just always present, and yet at the same time, some of the memories of the initial occupation of these Japanese soldiers was that they actually treated you, fairly well. Like you tell the one story of asking what kinds of flowers they had in Japan, and the soldier responded like, "You should know, what kind of flowers we had in Japan." But they treated you as a kid essentially when you were there. I mean,
but what I didn't realize, and I don't recall the other three authors as well, but I never realized the Japanese adored little children. I mean, little, maybe up to 10 or whatever, but you could pretty much do whatever you wished and they would not harm you. But I didn't know that at the time. And here they were. They had a gun. They were soldiers, and
so there was this pervasive sense of a threat, honestly. I mean, that's what you kind of grew up with, both in Germany and then in the Philippines. What does that do to shape your perspective on just humanity in general?
Well, when I think back on it all, the Japanese are human beings like the rest of us. And individually, there are some very nice, kind people among them. One or two are brutes or hoodlums or whatever, but that's true in any society. But again, that feeling comes with maturity. At the time, and for all four of us together, what are the Japanese doing here? Get the hell out of here. The enemy don't want anything to do with you people.
Sure.
In fact, the Japanese reopened the public schools shortly after they had come in. But my folks would not send me there. Why? Because I would have to learn Japanese. And the Japanese are the enemy. You will not learn the language. So I got tutoring. But to my regret, I never did learn Japanese.
Well, the book is Manila Memories. The author, one of the authors and editor of the book is Juergen Goldhagen. He's with us in studio today. How did you know to organize the book this way? Going back to sort of the way the book was written and constructed, you've got this very clear timeline from 1931 up until the liberation of Manila in 45. How did you know to construct the book chronologically like that? Because it seemed to work very well.
Well, I thought of it I concentrated about it for a while, and then rather than just putting my own story in from A to finish, and then Rod's story from A to Z, I thought, well, now wait a minute, to have 4 different stories, and each one covering their period from A to Z, didn't make as much sense, not to me anyway, as integrating them so that the war starting, well, my experience, each of our individual experiences were covered, and then the occupation itself and the details of the occupation, i.e. up to when the Japanese first arrived, while they were there, then the American air raid started, etc. So it just worked out that way.
I think another question that I was interested in as I was reading this is, what, if anything, did you learn about yourself in writing the book, Manila Memories, that you might not have imagined before you started working on this book project? What did you learn about yourself through doing this?
Well, I think, you know, first of all, of course, I learned that I had to interview these fellow authors. I had to go travel to where they lived. One lived in Connecticut, one in Pennsylvania, and one in London, and they are still there. And then I also learned the self-discipline of, okay, I've interviewed them now, and I did it with the speaker, the tape recorder. Then I went home and I transcribed the tape recorder onto the computer. And that took a while to do. And then, of course, I was able to get the sheets printed up and then mailed it out to these people for their review, added comments, whatever. So I learned how to be really disciplined and keep at it.
Well, we're coming down to our last minute or so here, and a good question to kind of wrap things up with, I think, for folks who are interested in writing a memoir, whether it's as dramatic as this, which would be hard to imagine, or whatever their memoir happens to be about. What have you learned through the process of doing this? What kind of advice would you give to somebody who, wants to write their memoir?
Well, one thing, of course, you have to think about it constantly. I mean, you can't just say, well, I'm going to write a memoir, and you sit down and you dash off a few thoughts, major thoughts, yeah, but then minor details as well. And if your parents are still living, to suddenly realize, hey, there are questions that I have to ask them, which once they're gone, I'll never have that chance again. I mean, they're gone. And, but, you just have to constantly, I think about what events did happen. And then, of course, you should attend how to write memoirs, courses along that line. And also, if you can do it, get into groups of writers, particularly those specializing in writing their memories.
Excellent. Well, we're just about out of time for today. I want to thank Juergen for joining us in studio, and for all of us here at the Artist Craft, Marnie working diligently in control, and the folks over in Master Control. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and go check out Manila Memories. You can find the book online through online retailers, so check it out. Manila Memories is the title of the book. Thank you very much.
And Stacey, the last few words, I want to thank you very much and the rest of the staff on having me here.
Thank you.
A wonderful opportunity.
We're glad to have you.